It was, our folks would be, would have some latitude because we haven't experienced I mean, we have a drought, there's no question about it, but it has not yet affected our domestic water supply.
But the only reason the governor can do that today is because of the drought emergency, which gives him the power to do that.
Right.
It's just a short-term deal. This would be basin by basin. Highland Valley Groundwater Basin would be formed, and that board that runs that group would have.
But he could still use his emergency powers and impose restrictions on basin by basin.
I suppose he could.
I mean, if he can do it to the city, he can do it to this.
Well, I suppose he could, but I mean, at this point, there is no groundwater laws governing the state of California. If I want to go put 10 wells on my place, I can do that. Nevada, you cannot. Oregon, you cannot. The state of California has no groundwater laws governing what you can take or not take. This district would give you, there would have to be, meters put on all groundwater, whether it be the city or Standish or Litchfield or my place or whoever. There's got to be money collected to monitor that. The city's well would be under everything. And this district, this board would have the power to say, city, you're going to cut down 10%.
So given that you live with it closer than all the rest of us, do you think we as a county should go with our 1989 law that hasn't been implemented, or do we wait and go with whatever they come up with, either of these two laws, probably between now and September, because they're going to be acting on this before they adjourn at the end of this month?
My suggestion right now would be first, see what they come up with, what they finally approve and becomes a law. Second off, we have a groundwater monitoring plan right now, and I'm going to let Maury speak on that, which we've already passed by this board. And hopefully that would be enough to hold the base for a while, or if they would say, yeah, that's good enough, we quit there. If they say no, you're going to deal with what we tell you, Senate Bill 1168 passes. Then I think our next thing would be, does our current law in place satisfy the state requirement? So maybe more, and then maybe Bob, I know you've done some research on it, you might give your take on it. And then Maury, why don't you come first and talk about
well, I think you did a pretty good job in describing it. I've read the proposed bill a couple times. It's vast. It really provides a lot of authority for what would be called a groundwater sustainability agency, which you, as Mr. Powell said, you'd be forced to have unless you have a plan in place, which we do. And I tend to think that the plan that we put together step by step with DWR 6 years ago or so would substantially comply with the components that are being proposed in this bill, at least initially. I think at first they're going to be ratcheting down on places that this bill is really aimed at, and that's, I don't think, us. And so I would agree with you. We see what the bill looks like in its final form. It's being amended frequently. And at the end of the day, they still have a caveat in there that says, upon their blessing, if you have a plan in place, that may be sufficient. And it's not inconsistent with our 4 districts that are in place, one of which is active, the others are missiles in a silo. And we've had council review the fact that we're not mandated to enact those districts. It's perfectly fine to let them sit idle. And if they are enacted, then those rules may be just like the groundwater monitoring plan. The groundwater monitoring plan would act, if the DWR agrees, as the guiding principle unless the district was formed inside of that. The groundwater management plan is almost all-encompassing. The districts obviously are specific locations. But I think right now we're just in a wait-and-see mode for this legislation, and to see if that caveat that our plan, if it's sufficient, will act instead of us becoming the sustainability agency.
Recently, a few months ago, you brought forward wasn't it a water management plan that we declined
Oh, the IRWM, yeah. A completely different topic, but that's surface water, not
That's
groundwater.
management of surface water.
Yeah.
All right.
Corey, you said there's 4 districts, where are they? Long
Yeah,
Valley?
Long Valley, which is the one district that's, I struggle with the word, but formulated. They're all formulated, but it's been enacted, and that's not a good word either, it's a tough word. But then you have Honey Lake Valley Basin, which had a lot of debate. I was going through the minutes this morning back in the day. Some ideas to amend the legislation, and I believe it ever was amended. And then you have Surprise Valley and Willow Creek. And so those all sit, as I said, ready to go if the board should want to appoint board of directors, which then would become a elected
How about the
position
Moore
eventually.
Lassen flood control district, is that, it's in the Big Valley Basin?
How about that? I was wondering.
What about them? What's the question? I'm sorry.
Is that considered a water board?
It's not a groundwater.
It's not a groundwater management.
That was
It's-
kind of.
It's
surface
not a recognized basin.
That was formed basically to manage surface water for the eventual development and implementation of the Allen Camp Dam, which never was built. It was authorized but never built by appropriation.
So as I said, the board is within its discretion to enact them or not to enact them.
Should we not be ahead of the curve and maybe start activating these water?
My personal opinion is no. There's a lot of complication that comes with formulating these districts as you
Yeah.
endeavor to toil with all these things that come before you. So I really think that the board has stated, at least previous boards, that the genesis of these districts was primarily focused on Nevada still water water.
Right.
But now as the drought becomes an issue, there is the added worry that water usage will become an internal issue. And when those issues present themselves, there may be cause to enact these districts. But I don't hear that happening, and so I wouldn't just rush to judgment and start activating the. And again, we have a groundwater management plan that overlays most of these areas anyway, so.
So a guy like Bob Marshall in Dry Valley starts sinking wells to take water.
That would be a great reason to, although I would say Dry Valley, actually, the way the Honey Lake boundary is formulated, it didn't include Dry Valley.
It didn't.
And it's a curiosity, I must say, today when I was looking at the map.
Well, that's what I mean by about being proactive to make sure.
I think we should wait to see what the state is going to do, and then, if necessary, use these others as tools to carve out our niche to try to, minimize whatever impact they would have to have the blanket one-size-fit-all type of approach, which is generally their nature.
Yeah,
So,
that's a blunt hammer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Those groundwater basins were conceived to insulate ourselves or protect ourselves from what Washoe County, Nevada was doing, 20, 25 years ago, which ultimately we prevailed, and they did not succeed in their grand scheme in terms of at least utilizing the water resources we have. But-
That threat's not gonna go away.
No, it's not, and we still have those as a tool, and they know we have those as a tool.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, this other thing, to protect ourselves from the overreach by Sacramento because of what's happening on the west slope, we need to have that as a tool. But I'm kind of with Maury. I think the less we do now in terms of pursuing those, waiting to see how it's gonna, and Aaron's gonna learn more as he goes to the meeting this week, I'm sure. And we have Brian Dolly in Sacramento, who's very much involved in those discussions and is very knowledgeable of all of this. So he'll keep us, I'm sure, alert as to, what is gonna prevail. It's good intelligence to know that the Senate version, this bill is probably gonna gain traction over the one that the Assembly has.
Yeah, and I don't think, Jim, it's wait and see if it happens. It is.
It's
going
gonna
to
happen,
It's gonna happen.
but how it happens and to what extent it
Right.
will impact us remains to be seen. So we need to be ready to respond to that, but the tools we have include using these groundwater districts.
I think maybe, the question to Bob is, and your job for Bob is,
says Senate Bill 1721, which is the Honey Lake Valley Groundwater District Act, passed in 1989. It is state law as we speak. Would that protect us from
The next.
it's a new state law, Senate Bill 1168?
Depends on what the final form of the Senate bill is that's approved by the legislature and signed by the governor.
What you have to make sure is that there's no repeal provisions in here that would repeal something like 1721.
I didn't see that.
I didn't either.
But I don't, I mean, there's a lot to read.
Now,
There's a lot
Yeah,
to
it's like
read.
fine print.
in the Senate bill,
Yeah.
what they're saying is that they recognize, depletion of groundwater levels statewide. They recognize the need to regulate it, because I think, if I recall correctly, California is one of the last states in the union to legislate groundwater.
I don't know about in the union, but our neighbors, Nevada and Oregon,
Certainly.
do have legislation.
That, subsidence is a real issue and the like, and so they're saying, the state is saying, look, we think local control is good, and so through the legislation, they're saying someone in the county has to raise their hand and formulate and be this groundwater management agency, and in the legislation, by default, the state will look to the county to fulfill that mission if no one else in the county does that. And so
If the
that's
county
kind of
will, the state will.
Right.
and that's the other issue is that we're gonna give you some time to raise your hand to create this agency and implement rules and regulations and the like to, promote conservation of groundwater, to keep levels, so there's no depletion. But if you don't, by a date certain, then we're gonna come in and do it. And more to the point, your groundwater management plan, as implemented by your groundwater management agency, is subject to our review, so we can be certain that you're not going to create a plan that really has no effect of saving groundwater over time. And so, to answer your question specifically, I think we wait. I agree with Maureen. I think we wait and we see.
Well, we have to wait till they pass.
Of course,
But I mean, the reason I brought this up to be proactive.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think we had a conversation about this previously, and that was, number one, would a constituted board of the Honey Lake Valley Groundwater Management District preclude the state from taking control? I think there was perhaps some early language of groundwater management legislation that talked about, the state's just gonna come in and manage it. But possibly if you already had management going on, then leave it alone. And that's not actually what's coming to pass in the legislation. What's coming to pass in the legislation, if it goes through in close to its current form, is that, we'll be left to manage it, or whoever in the county raises their hand. And that, just as long as you do a good job, basically. And that's, I think, essentially what they're saying. And so, whether you choose as a board of supervisors to, rely on those, what do you call them, missiles in a silo, those different groundwater districts, constituted or not, to implement their own groundwater management plans, or to be, 4 separate agencies, if you will, or whether or not it comes through building and planning services as kind of the master, or however that would go, I think is a decision best left for another time when we see what the legislation actually says. But there's choices.
But if we are required to do it, Senate Bill 1721, our existing districts, that's not no little deal either.
No.
That is very involved.
Well, I think the answer, Bob can take a look at, this is on page 12 of 33 of Senate Bill 1168 is proposed.
Page 12.
Page 12, yeah, on 33. The page doesn't up here in the right corner.
On the top.
And it says, this is 10.720.9A, and this is the kind of stuff we have to kind of keep in mind. It says, except as provided in, and they're striking out a section and changing it to subdivision D. This part does not apply to the following adjudicated areas.
Yeah.
I don't have that on page 12.
Senate bill?
Senate Bill 1168.
This Assembly Bill 1739, I think.
No,
this
I'm
is
looking
Senate
at the
Bill
Senate bill.
1168, this one right here.
Mine's different.
No, that's, you're looking at this.
1721.
Well, everybody must make sure they're looking at the amended as of August 6th.
Well, okay, this is a different printout, I
It is,
guess.
yeah.
But anyway, it lists in here, and they're talking about, this is the provisions on sustainable groundwater management. I mean, they've got different sections of extraction policy. This is sustainable groundwater management. So they're talking about the groundwater basins in the state that already have met a threshold in terms of a sustainable thing. So everything is not, and what they're doing is there's 22 basins, starting with Beaumont, Bright, Central, Chino, all the way down to Warren Valley Basin and West Coast Basin, Shepherd, Los Angeles River Basin. So they've already gone in and they've already determined the basins that already have an effectable management program in place. And they're saying these folks are exempt because they're already meeting the thresholds that they're wanting to impose with this law. And the concern is you don't see Honey Lake groundwater basin, you don't see Sierra Valley, Long Valley. So what happens is even though we have this from 1989, the fact that we have not effectively implemented this because the Washoe folks wound up being beat back, and we've been sitting there, and even though we have the authority to do this, because we still haven't got it, we're not on the good list. And so therefore the provisions of this bill, irrespective of the fact that you have this law on the books, they're saying that, so what, you have that law, this is supposed to be doing these things, and they haven't, and so as a result, they've got, when you look at the definitions of it, they talked about probationary basins and then basins that are like fully functioning. And so these are the fully functioning basins. So these are the ones that are going to be immune from the full effects of this law because they're already doing things that they want done. We're sitting here with a law and aren't doing anything with it, and as a result, we're going to be treated just like any other area in the state, you know, in terms of kind of being reformed. And that's how I read this.
There's other language in this, it's 33 pages. It's a big bill.
Did print too.
They talk about, and maybe Mr. Anderson looked at it a couple times as well, they talk about defining high, medium, and low priority groundwater basins.
That's 10, 7,
And they most
22.4.
definitively say that the high and medium priority groundwater basins will receive more attention than the low priority basins. I don't know where we are.
We're low.
We're low.
We're low.
Well, that's.
Well, there's
a certain
also a
degree of
very,
comfort.
there's also a very.
Good, that's a good one.
Yeah, and so my expectation would be if we're able to provide them in whatever form with some assurance that we're not, in the long term, depleting our groundwater levels, even though we may not have on every well in the community a measuring device, even though we may not require, assessment of every potential well drilling activity to determine whether or not it's going to deplete or not, we still may be okay, but that's one of those things that remains to be seen what's in the actual legislation.
Yeah, I think with anything of this magnitude, that it shakes out over a period of years after it's adopted and put into law, because it's not only just going to be policy decisions, but it's going to be case law that's going to drive where these things land and what they really mean. And I just have to think we're small pickings considering that we're way ahead of the game with our groundwater management plan and our 4 districts. So, yeah, I think it's just a wait and see.
But when you say management, I mean, really the only way to manage your groundwater is for one, you have to know, how many acre feet are you actually taking out of the aquifer.
That's exactly right.
So,
You have to have some ground level idea of where the water is at this moment.
Exactly.
And that's what the groundwater management plan that the board has adopted really addresses, is you establish these monitoring wells, you try to develop a baseline, and then your decisions in the future are based on as you watch the monitoring. And so, yeah, in the absence of that, you don't, it's a big black box, you don't know what's going on.
It sounds nice, you got a management plan,
Well,
but unless you know, I mean, how many acre feet. Every guy-
This law would require anybody that's pumping groundwater to register.
Right.
So you could add up every gallon's being registered. And that gives you what's taken off. And then your DWR, somebody appropriate has to say what the recharge is. And you gotta put all this together, it's a big deal.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, what they're
That's
looking,
what I'm saying, yeah.
what they're looking for in chapter 6 of the Senate bill coming up is a groundwater sustainability plan. So once you quantify everything, they kind of want to know how you're going to manage it. Now, they're only focusing in terms of imposing these standards on the medium and high priority basins. So if we're low or very low, because there's 4 categories, my guess is we're probably, if we're not in the low category, we're in the very low category, at least out here, because just the size and the physical location. But that's what they're really looking to, is a 5, 10, and 20-year sustainability. I mean, so that you don't ultimately lead to the overdrafts and have the subsidence that you see down in those basins in the Central Valley. And that's all outlined on page 19, 20, and 21 of this bill.
Yeah, it might be like 5, 10 years out or whatever, but eventually it seems like everybody, you know, you're gonna have to know exactly how many acre feet you're pumping out of your well. The district, the management district's gonna probably cap so many, you know,
But
acre feet,
Yeah.
and then everybody's gonna be like Nevada, where you kind of buy, you know, you got a water right of like X
it's like-
thousand
it's like
acre
carbon- like
feet,
carbon
and
credits.
Yeah.
that's what it's gonna get to.
Well, the other thing in this book parallels this here, you need to keep in mind, they're having, and it's gonna have to be decided this week for the ballot purposes, is what kind of bond they're gonna be putting on the November ballot to replace the 11.2 billion one that everybody's against now. And that was, this morning they had another series of articles in the V about what happened yesterday and the struggle between the Assembly and the Senate and the governor. But a big part of it is about water storage. And what's interesting is the Republicans in the Assembly, and Brian's part of that group, you know, they're focusing on, they want that bond to focus on water storage. And it's not just necessarily building dams and increasing, you know, lake levels for storage, but underground water storage is becoming the preferred model. In other words, finding the aquifers that we have and taking what water we can capture and pump down into those aquifers to hold until such a time as we need to pull them back out, which I think is a relatively recent, you know, policy decision is being made by Sacramento. So they're looking at underground storage. You don't have as much evaporation and other loss like that, and that's, the Republicans want to have $2.5 billion of the $6 billion that they're kind of greening now is going to be the bond measure proposal. It's got to be tied to some sort of storage strategy, whether it's above ground or below ground. So that's playing out right next to this bill going down the pipeline. So the reason why there's importance in this and why they're all of a sudden given a lot of interest in groundwater, which they haven't had a lot in recent years, is because they're looking at using this for a storage tank.
Yeah, that is true, but I think it's small, because
Yeah.
my conversation with Brian a few days ago, the reason they are against this bond is because what the governor is proposing is not enough to do anything, so nothing will happen as far as surface storage goes. $1 billion for, in the state of California, for surface storage is zero. It will do nothing. It's not enough money. So they're saying, let's get real and do it right. We want more money, more billions in that legislation or the bond.
Well, yeah, the governor and his people don't even want to put $1 million into storage, and the Republicans in both houses are saying we want to see more storage.
We want to see more money.
But the effect is where you store it. You can put it above ground. You can only keep building up the dams so high and creating bigger storage bases. But it's the underground stuff that's becoming more on the radar.
I agree and disagree with you. It's being more looked at. They don't know enough about it now and where they can do it. It's easy to see where we can build dams. It's not easy to see where we can store water underground. Okay.
I guess we've solved that problem.
Well,
Well, I think we've had a good, I want to be proactive on this. I don't wanna be sitting around here, you know, and all of a sudden, the
Well-
state's in Lassen County, you know, telling me I gotta shut my water off. Because Oregon has actually done that. They have actually GPS some groundwater wells out there and, put locks on them and say you will not use this water again. Because there's a suit against the state, and the state controls the water. And it's
Even if the
groundwater.
water's available, they're gonna try to shut you down, and that's what now the municipalities are dealing
Or it could
with.
be city of Susanville too.
Yeah, no,
They
they're all.
can say, hey, we're only gonna allow you to take half of what you're taking.
If the governor's mandate, you know, remains in effect, what the city is looking at is operating under, even though they've got, their water tanks are full and they've got sufficient flow coming out of the springs and the wells, they have to reduce their water consumption by 15 to 25%.
So I think what we need to do is direction the staff would be, keep up on the current, when this passes, when the Senate bill, whatever passes, what it says, and I would say work with RCRC and CSAC and get their experts' opinion on.
And we'll know by
Where we
the
headed?
first week in September, because that's when they're supposed to be done,
that when it's
at
happening.
the end of the session.
I
We
guess,
should tentatively re-agendize this item
I
for
think we
later in
should.
September.
Our first
we
meeting
have
in
maybe a
September.
meeting later in September where we have time to get some information and know what's going on.
It will take a short period of time after the final legislation's approved to get, it'd be nice to have, you know, some of these entities, RCRC or CSAC or the like, will likely put out, maybe the California Groundwater Association, put out summaries of what the actual legislation is. It'd be nice to be able to come back to you armed with
I
those.
would say late in September or maybe early in October. It's gonna take a while.
Whatever your pleasure is.
The last meeting in September. I mean, if we don't have nothing on it, we don't have nothing on it.
Understand?
Just want her to put it on the agenda.
Maybe we'll be closer to knowing whether there's final legislation or not. If there's no summaries available,
Well,
we
the
can certainly
legislature
discuss.
approves, the governor has up to 30 days to sign or veto a bill, and so even though the legislature is active, you know, what the governor does won't be known for maybe, so possibly Bob's right, maybe the last meeting in September, and if there isn't anything substantial at that point, then we can roll it into early October.
Right, it's the last meeting in September, have an update on current legislation.
Yes, sir.
We'll know what they're gonna do, and we're gonna know whether our
You got that?
what we have on the books is gonna sustain us, but I think that one section there on page 12 where it lists the basins, I think they're already beginning to filter out who they're going to exempt and who they're going to go
So
after.
obviously Fresno County's gonna get hit hard, and Lassen, Modoc County, Sierra County are not gonna hit.
We're probably low or very low.
I hope we're very low in that basin, that might pretty much exempt us from anybody even wanting to look and talk to, hopefully. And maybe what we got in place, we got a water management plan that we're using now, maybe that will be enough if we're low priority. That'll be what we hope for.
Maybe Maury can just pump it up and make it look bigger and ominous than it is.
Well, I do take the position that they can demonstrate to us why it's inadequate. I mean, they don't have the resources. Once this starts happening, their resources are not going to be dedicated to arguing with us.
But they can make us use our resources to do it.
We are always going to be a attractive
It could be.
workforce for the state.
They could make it $100,000 a year budget. Mandated by the state of California.
Okay, thanks. Before we move on, is there any members of the public that have anything to say on this item?
Okay, so everybody's probably too confused.
Are we good?
It is a big deal, and Senate Bill, you can get this off your internet, Senate Bill 1168. And there's a lot to read, and I've gone through it twice, and I probably need to go through it 10 more times.
Well, it's kind of important to follow it online like that because changes happen. I mean, the copy I have printed here,
The right
5
here
days from now
amended.
could be outdated because they're constantly updating.
This was amended April 10th, April 23rd, June 17th, August 4th, and August 6th.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a liquid document at this point.
So I think going online and looking at the current version on a day-to-day basis is probably a good idea.
Thanks again, Bob. Appreciate it. Okay, we're gonna move on to item H2. Deals with the Child Support Awareness Month. Hi.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Cody from the Department of Child Support Services. And speaking of the governor, he last week issued a proclamation proclaiming Child Support Awareness Month for the state of California for August. And so before, well, I don't know if it's before you, but it soon will be before you, there is the proclamation proclaiming Child Support Awareness Month for Lassen County that I would like you to adopt.
Yeah, thank you. Any, questions?
Motion, adopt the resolution, or whatever it is. I make motion to adopt the resolution.
Thanks. All right, well, thank you very much for bringing this forward. And, is there any public comment on it, or any questions? All right, well, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the chair votes aye. Thank you. Okay. Move on to item H3.
Mr. Chairman, Maury Anderson from Planning and Building Services. What you have before you is action requested is to receive the memorandum of understanding and approve said MOU and authorize the county administrative officer to sign it. I was before the board some time ago. The rancheria has requested our help in doing plans, examination, and inspection services. They don't have the ability to do it themselves. They're proposing, I think right now, less than a dozen homes, but it could be more, it could be less. We are very interested in providing that service. We have worked extensively with our outside counsel in having this MOU be airtight, and we believe that it has all the protections that the building code would, as we can be on federal lands when we do these inspections. We thought it was very important to get those sewn up. And the only distinction would be, the only difference that's going to be happening at the rancheria versus out in Lassen County is they are not going to be required to have the sprinkler system as we are by the Uniform Building Code here in the rest of the state. So lucky them, too bad for us. But we are very enthusiastic to move forward. They're already starting to look at foundations, and they want to get going, and it's getting late. So we recommend you approve said MOU.
I'll make the motion to approve the MOU.
You find a typo, Mr. Chapman?
No, I was just, it's a formatting thing that's kind of humorous.